to see if it any gets better.
I get to do all the cool shit.
Don't, when you're finished, don't like hit like done or whatever. I'll just come up to you. If there's like an option to like save it, just like save it to the page. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So, can you hear it?
I didn't check.
Is this because I don't want people to be like,
Yeah, we can hear it.
timekeeper, Mr. Sean Newhouse back there, who will hold up different warning signals of the time left for each person's response. And in addition to that, and Allison will explain more about this at the end, but you'll have a chance to vote for leading thought votes by the top Democrats or the top Republicans at the end. We have already had a flip of the coin. Flip of the coin was won by the Democrats. So the college Democrats will go first and introduce themselves and give their opening statement. So, Tom, the floor is yours. Abigail.
Hi everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Go Everywhere for sponsoring this event. I'd also like to thank Governor Taft for moderating it, for college Republicans for showing up, and for all of you guys for being here. So I'm Abigail Dibaj. I'm a senior here studying political science with a minor in English, and I'm also pursuing my graduate certificate in nonprofit and community organization. Right next to me is Pedrotti, studying political science, and he actually is the president of College Democrats and I'm vice president. So College Democrats is a club on campus that allows students opportunities to become civically engaged. It also fosters an environment for liberally minded students to become active and express their opinions. We meet every other Monday, and our next meeting is on the 22nd at 8 p.m. in room 23 in St. Joe. So if you guys like what we say at this debate, feel free to stop by. We are open for everyone.
Good evening, everyone. I'm John Gomez. I am the president of UD College Republicans. I'm joined by my vice president, Griffin Weasel. I'm a senior political science and economics major. Griffin is a junior political science major. I want to thank Go Everywhere for hosting this. This is always one of my favorite events to take part in. I want to thank Governor Taft for being here. I always appreciate his time. And I want to thank you guys all for showing up. Love a big turnout. So College Republicans, we'll just give you a brief overview of what we do. We bring a lot of elected officials to campus. We bring Senator Rob Corbin to campus before, Congressman Turner, many other elected officials. They were also heavily involved in politics in the area. Myself and other members of College Republicans have managed campaigns in the area. And we've done a lot to help our locally elected officials keep office here in Montgomery County.
Our first question, and we will start with the Republicans. First question is, why does the November 6th election matter? What's at stake?
Well, thank you, Governor. This upcoming election is important because it determines the direction of our country with regard to a whole host of issues, including healthcare, taxes, Supreme social services, and the direction of the courts across the country, up into and including the Supreme Court. As citizens of voting age, it's important to remember the topics we discussed tonight when you all go to the polls or request your absentee ballot for the upcoming November 6th election.
There are obviously more issues than just that at stake this November. Here locally, we have a lot of judges on the ballots, county recorder, county commissioners. And so I'll come back to this later, but I just want to reiterate, your vote matters. At every level, your vote matters. Probably locally more than any other place, because these are the people who determine your day-to-day lives, who have a lot to do with how we get to school, how safe we are out here, our police force, all these different issues. So your vote matters, and at stake in November are all these issues and many, many more.
Every election matters, of course it does, but this one matters even more so than most. When one party controls all three branches of government, everyone loses. That's because with one party rule, all that you can get is corruption and complacency. And the Republicans currently control all three branches of government. That's why it's so important that Democrats take back as many races as they can, particularly the House, so that we can restore honor and inclusiveness to the country. It's also so important that this election is so important. It's important that Democrats win, so that because of the issues, it's important that we win so that we can protect the rights of women and minorities. It's important that we can ensure health care for everyone, and it's important that we can make America a country that works for everyone.
Okay, we will now move on to the second question, which deals with the topic of health care. What changes should be made, if any, in federal health care policy as reflected in programs of Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act? And we'll start with College now.
Our argument on health care really boils down to one thing, that how much money someone makes shouldn't determine whether or not they can survive getting sick. The Affordable Care Act was a good step in the right direction to where we need to be as a nation. Although there were flaws with the legislation, it ultimately resulted in millions of people receiving coverage for the first time in their lives. In 2010, before the Affordable Care Act took effect, there were 48 million Americans without health insurance. That means there were 48 million Americans who were unable to afford getting sick. By 2016, under the Affordable Care Act, that number had dropped to 28.6 million. However, this number is still too high, and we have not gone far enough. The United States is still the only country, the only major country in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care as a basic human right. And I'll say that again. We're still the only country, the one, in the industrialized world that does not guarantee health care as a basic human right. The solution to this is a single-payer system, in which just one public fund provides health care to everyone, regardless of income. We already have a type of single-payer system in place for certain types of people, and it's been wildly successful. These are known as Medicare and Medicaid. These provide health insurance for the elderly and the severely impoverished. With the success of these programs, it is nonsensical in 2018 not to expand this coverage to everyone. Some people worry that this would amount to a government takeover of healthcare, but this simply isn't the case. Doctors can still be private actors, and hospitals can still be private institutions. The only difference is that healthcare services would be paid for publicly, and people would no longer die when they cannot afford healthcare procedures. To argue that one's ability to recover from an illness should depend on how much money they make is simply unconscionable.
Well, obviously we disagree with that in many ways. First thing I'm going to start with is the Affordable Care Act was a terrible law when it was passed. It is still a terrible law today. It needs to be repealed. And let me talk about a little bit of what they said about Medicare for all, single-payer healthcare system. When you have a socialized healthcare system, you have socialized decisions over life and death. Do we all remember the story of Charlie Gard last year from the UK? The UK is well known for their single-payer system. And Charlie Gard was a little baby. He was about a year old, and he was terminally ill, but there was an opportunity for his family to take him elsewhere, take him to the United States for experimental treatment that could have saved his life. The British Health Service denied this request. The parents had no legal right. The British Supreme Court said there's no legal right for you to take your child somewhere else to get health care. Socialized health, as I said, means socialized decisions over one's health. I don't think we want that. And something else you won't hear from the Democrats is the price tag on this. States have looked into this over the years, and the numbers, they aren't good. New York, state of New York looked into this, and their budget alone for their entire state government is $80 billion. For a state to do a single-payer system would cost between $90 billion and $240 billion a year. Vermont, it would cost an extra $2.5 billion a year, which is double their entire state budget. In California, it would be a $400 billion system. So these costs are obviously, in a country where we have $21 trillion in debt, $1 billion deficit, and really no appetite to cut that spending, these are some real issues. And I'll talk about this a little bit in the rebuttal, but Republicans stand for a free market in healthcare. That would include repealing the Affordable Care Act, expanding health savings accounts, expanding access to low-cost plans, repealing regulations and taxes that drive up the cost of healthcare, and supporting FDA reciprocation, which means if Canada approves a drug to the FDA, it would be approved here in the United States. That bring down costs a great deal, and I'll talk a little bit more about our beliefs in a minute.
Yeah, so John, you spent a lot of your time talking about how single-payer would be too expensive or it's not practical. Well, I think it should just be noted that single-payer can and does work in dozens of countries across the world, and to imply that it wouldn't work here is simply dishonest. Now, our opponents will often argue that guaranteeing the human right of healthcare would be too expensive. First of all, I think that you might find some ethical problems with that argument if you stop and think about it, but more importantly, it just isn't true. Even if you accept the inflated single-payer costs put forth by the right, it's still less than what Americans are currently paying for healthcare when all things are taken into account. The cost is simply shifted from being paid out of pocket to being paid through taxes. For example, people who cannot afford insurance are often forced to wait until their condition is dire before they seek treatment. And this ends up being much costlier than if they could have afforded to catch the illness early. Additionally, under a single-payer system, administrative costs drop from 13% of total expenditure to just under 2%. Not only is single-payer less expensive overall when all things are taken into account, it also ensures that everyone gets coverage, not just those who are wealthy enough to afford it for themselves.
Thomas, I'm sorry, but that's just not true. That, at the end of the day, it's not true. Do you know hates Medicare and Medicaid more than anyone else? It's the doctors who have to spend hours and hours and hours away from their patients because they have to deal with all this administrative overlay. That is where we're getting a huge added cost into our healthcare system. Another problem is that healthcare companies and hospitals don't make their prices public, which is another issue which we think needs to be rectified. And what you won't hear from our friends on the left is that free markets in healthcare do work. In the United States here, a great example we have is LASIK eye surgery. Years ago when it was introduced, and this is not covered by insurance, years ago when it was introduced, it was $1,000 up to $5,000 an eye to get that LASIK eye surgery done. Today you can get it done for about $500 for both. This is an unregulated market, well not unregulated, this is a uncovered market by the health insurance industry. So we've seen prices come down and the quality of LASIK eye surgery go up. This can apply to an entire market, especially when you have government, which is never good at its job, getting out of the way.
Our third question deals with the economy. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 reduced taxes for individuals and businesses. Should tax rates under that act be retained or should they be revised? And we'll start with the Republicans.
Well, John and I are under the opinion that the tax cuts should be made permanently. Consider what we see today. The stock market has been hitting records almost every week, and the tax cuts have proven to breathe life into the economy. Prices have been dropping throughout the country, and we should also remember that we can't keep these tax cuts though unless our government spending comes under control. So with this, we would support the tax cuts under the stipulation that they would be curbed to some sort of government spending so we don't go into more of a deficit like I'm sure the Democrats will issue that concern in their rebuttal.
And so there are three principles that guide further tax reform because the job isn't done. The first is, like Griffin said, making these tax cuts permanent. Right now, because of the rules of the Senate, they're only around for 10 years. So we need to make those permanent. We also need to lower the corporate rate down to 15%, get that in line with the rest of the world and competitive with the rest of the world. But more importantly, like Griffin said, we need a balanced budget in this country. We need to cut spending. We need to make sure that this $21.5 trillion debt does not continue to spiral out of control because at the end of the day, we're the ones who are going to be paying for it. But I also just want to say about the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that it has been a great help to our economy. The IRS estimates that this year alone, we're going to see a 4 to 7% decrease in the amount of time that is spent complying with the IRS tax code, which for those who don't know is a 70,000-page document that is a behemoth that takes many specialized people to figure out even what it means. So the 4 to 7% saving in compliance is going to boil down to about a $3.1 billion to $5.4 billion savings, $billion in savings just so we don't have to deal with that anymore. So we need to further simplify the code, bring the rates down even further. Yeah, so we in general support the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act.
So, when Republicans and Donald Trump introduced this bill, they promised that the Tax Breaks and Job Act was designed to benefit the middle class. And as the average median household income in the U.S. is $60,000, the majority of Americans should be pretty pumped. But what Republicans and Donald Trump have been telling you is a lie. Rather than the middle class benefiting and thriving, the richest 1% of Americans will receive 25% of the tax benefit over time. That's the richest of the rich, the 1%, getting a quarter of the tax breaks. That's ridiculous. And after the tax break ends in 2025, which they said they'll continue, Republicans said they'll do that, but who knows? Taxes actually go up for the middle class. And so for small businesses, it's even worse. If Congress really wanted to make sure tax cuts would drive the economy and job growth long term, they would at least treat small businesses as the same as corporate ones. And yet corporate America got a 40% rate reduction in the form of a permanent tax cut. This one doesn't end. A permanent tax cut. Well, only certain small businesses got about a 9% effective rate reduction. And even those crumbs expire for small businesses in 2025. So every small business owner should look at the 2017 tax bill and feel underappreciated, insulted, and abused. The tax break went into the corporate sector that for a decade has shown little to no interest in investing in the economy, no interest in raising wages for employees, and instead has worked to deepen the pockets of their own CEOs. Plain 2017 tax bill. It's just another tax cut for the rich and large corporations. The tax brackets need to be revised so that the majority of the benefits work for the majority of Americans.
So, Abigail, a great friend of mine, referred to the tax cuts as crumbs. Please go into rural Ohio and tell people who are getting a $3,000 tax cut a year that those are crumbs. $3,000 is a lot of money, and it's insulting that you would say that that's crumbs. I agree, these rates still a little high, let's get them even further down, let's make these cuts permanent. But to say that these are crumbs is just unbelievable. The people at the lowest end of the economic spectrum benefit the most here, because in this bill, in this law, the standard deduction was doubled from $6,500 a year to $6,500 a year to $13,000 a year, and for joint filers, $13,000 to $24,000 a year. So that's people at the lowest end of the spectrum who don't have to pay money, income tax on the little income they have to begin with.
I just like to make a correction. When John said 3,000, he probably meant 16,000 because that's what the median average household would get. And it is crumbs compared to the $33,000 that the 1% would get. And relating to jobs, so right now our economy is doing pretty well. We have like a 3-point-something percent. It's a really low unemployment rate, and that's great. But we're investing in the upper class and corporations when we really need to be investing in the middle class. The customers are the job creators, and then they're the center of the economic universe is the middle class. Instead of giving them $1,500 a year in tax breaks, maybe we should consider investing more.
Then I go to question number 4, which is about immigration. What changes should be made to current immigration laws? And we'll start with the Democrats.
Okay. So immigration is really important to me for a lot of reasons, but specifically my grandpa is an immigrant from Iran, and he's a trained pediatric physician, and he immigrated to the United States to escape the civil war in Iran. And then in Iowa, he met my grandmother, and they had 5 kids, which one of those is my dad. So it was extremely disheartening to hear that Iran was on the list of countries of Trump's travel ban. The ban was more than a thinly veiled attempt to block Muslims from entering the country, as was rhetoric in Trump's campaign. For me, this means that my Aunt Donia, who used to come on the holidays, can't visit anymore. The travel ban was enacted with the intention of stopping terrorists from entering the country. Well, in fact, there have not been terrorist attacks by Iranians visiting the U.S. since 9/11. So the travel ban is not limiting terrorism in the U.S., but rather blocking family reunification and Muslims seeking a better life. And then another immigration policy, which is extremely important and needs to be acted on like right now, is the one keeping detained children on the border. So let me reiterate that. Around 500 children who came with their families to the U.S. to legally seek asylum are still alone on the border. By detaining children, we're treating asylum seekers like animals, when we shouldn't even be treating them like criminals. Seeking asylum is legal. Currently, the cost of holding migrant children who have been separated from their families in these 10 cities is $775 per person per night, far more expensive than keeping kids with their parents in a detention center. How much of the U.S. budget do we really want to continue to spend on detained children? How much longer can the moral compass of the U.S. remain so skewed that we are willing to take children from the arms of their mothers?
So immigration for me is a very personal subject. My father came to this country from Spain. He's an immigrant. So I'm a first-generation American, and I'm a first-generation college student. And so I understand, immigration in all of its facets. And in the United States, we have a broken immigration system. There's a lot of things that need to be changed. And the first one is that to remain competitive in the world, a globalized world where labor is shifting all the time, we need to make sure we have an updated and economically sound guest worker program in the United States. So that means H-1B visas, H-2B visas. So people coming to this country legally on visas, adding to our economy, as immigrants are one of the biggest groups of people who do add to our economy. So that is obviously one of the bigger things on the policy side. What you usually hear about when it comes to immigration is the wall and border security. we support installing border security measures such as surveillance towers, camera sensors, using radiation detectors, and walls where appropriate along the southern border. But that's not really necessarily an issue of immigration, that's an issue of national security. And we know in Dayton here, all the heroin and opiates that are devastating this community, they come from the southern border. They come over the border into Texas and then up 75, and they meet here 75 and 70, causing this opiate crisis to get even worse. So we need to really work on our border security.
Speaking of border security, this is also something I can talk about myself. This summer I was able to visit the border in Nogales, Arizona, and I was really alarmed at what I saw when I went to the border. I was unfortunately learned that at the border at Nogales, they currently have cattle fence from the 1920s. And I don't think anyone in this room should feel comforted that a cattle fence is all we have protecting our country from motivated and not motivated, but people that we don't know who are coming into our country.
Okay. Yes. So illegal immigrants, that's a really big topic. And most illegal immigrants end up coming into the country by overstaying their visas. They don't cross the border. They don't climb through the walls. No, they just overstay their visas. And then also, the crime rate for those who actually come into the country illegally is actually lower than the general population. So the claim that we're having rapists and all these scary people coming over is not true at all. I think what we really need to focus on is fixing our immigration system and considering human rights.
I'd just like to add something really quick. You mentioned that the drug problem is largely from drugs coming up from the southern border. A large majority of the fentanyl coming in, which is driving the drug problem, is being shipped here straight from China.
Yes, heroin is coming from Mexico and fentanyl from China.
You got it. Rebuttal. Go ahead.
Yes. So yeah, you're right. That is how it's working. But we're working on the Senator report is actually working on actually this bill passed to stop fentanyl coming in the mail from China. We'll talk about that another time though. So Abigail brought up deportations and illegal immigration. There are about estimates 11 million to 15 million illegal immigrants in this country. Obviously, we can't deport all of them without a massive disruption of daily life, civil liberties, and all these things, nor would we want to. That is not something we are in favor of. We can't deport 11 million people out of the countries in a constitutional way. So what we support and favor is finding a way for these people to stay in this country legally while their immigration status is determined, whether that be a temporary visa system or a pathway to citizenship is up to Congress at this point. But those, I will add, those immigrants who come to this country and commit crimes should immediately be deported. You can't come to our country illegally, commit crimes, and expect to stay. That simply is not how it works in the real world.
Our final question before you go, we go to a question from you, the audience. Deals with guns. Should stricter gun laws be enacted? And we'll start with the college Republicans.
We do not support stricter gun laws. The college Republicans are under the position that whenever strict gun laws are enacted, it results in more crime, whether we look at it in cities throughout the country, whether it's Chicago or somewhat. And so we believe that gun control generally is counterproductive, and we also do not support the assault weapons ban because, as it has shown, when you ban assault weapons and pistol crimes with pistols and smaller weapons then rise, and we think that's counterproductive, and we think restricting freedoms is counterproductive in all general senses.
Put simply, we believe in the Second Amendment, and the Supreme Court ruled in the Heller case that there is an individual right to keep and bear arms. I'm sure we're going to hear from our friends on the left is that you're only allowed to keep and bear arms in a militia. Well, the historic meaning of militia has always been the people, has always been individuals, and the Heller decision, absolutely should read it if you get the chance, is a great discussion of that. And I'm sure our friends on the left will also bring up the Australian model of confiscating guns and gun control, which was a ban on all semi-automatic rifles and repeating shotguns. 700,000 people were required to turn their guns in. Didn't work. It did not work. People had their civil liberties violated. No one turned in their guns. And that was in a country of 3 million people. Scaled it up by about 100 or so. We have 300 million people in this country, over 300 million people. And If the Australian model worked, and that model only reduced about a third of the guns out there, we'd still have about 200 million guns left around this country. And there are areas where we can do better, including the background check system in this country. There are loopholes that we can close, and talk about that in just a few seconds. We also, for the record, oppose raising the age to buy a rifle to 21. That's the opposite direction of where we should be going in this country with regards to young people.
Appreciate you taking some guesses about what I'd be arguing. Unfortunately, you weren't right, so sorry about that. What I would like to point out is that America has a serious problem with gun violence, and to argue otherwise or to ignore that is simply wrong. With between 30 and 35,000 gun deaths each year in the United States, we have the 10th highest rate of gun deaths in the entire world, and we also have by far the highest rate of gun ownership in the entire world. With the next highest country, their rate is about half of ours. Now, we're not here to take anyone's guns away, contrary to what they might argue. I don't think I said that specifically, but a lot of Republicans will argue that Democrats want to take your guns away, but that's not true. We simply feel that the United States needs to make simple changes to keep Americans safe. And these simple and common sense changes are that we need to eliminate loopholes in background checks so that you can no longer go to a gun show and purchase a gun without a background check. We need to limit the availability of certain types of high-powered rifles that are so often used in mass shootings. And thirdly, we need to institute red flag laws to ensure that people who pose a significant threat to themselves or others are no longer able to have access to firearms in the United States. I know there's some support for that on the other side as well. Now, a common argument against stricter gun control laws is the argument that we need guns for self-defense, and the more guns you have, the safer you'll be. This is an argument that sounds like it makes sense, but the statistics consistently suggest otherwise. In 2013, there were only 230 justifiable gun deaths. That means times when a gun was used to kill someone for self-defense. And that's a 1 to 135 ratio. Keep in mind there were about 35,000 gun deaths total. Additionally, in 2017, there were 345 mass shootings in the United States. This is something that can no longer stand, and something that would be not eliminated, but the effects of this would be severely limited by stricter gun control laws.
So I'll just start where we kind of agree. On red flag laws, we support red flag laws so long as they're done right. This is can be a very touchy issue with regards to due process, civil liberties. We would need to see a specific policy for support over that or not. You kept bringing up the number of people who die by guns every year. What you fail to mention is that 2/3 of those deaths are suicides. 2/3, if not more, are suicides. So that knocks out a lot of those deaths. And so there are issues with crime in the United States, but the trend over the last 40 years has been a decrease in violent crime in the United States, a decrease in the uses of guns with violent crime. That's something we just need to acknowledge. And what you alluded to was an assault weapons ban. Assault weapons are just a vague term. They're not actually defined as anything in particular, in case you were wondering. So 1994 to 2004, we did have an assault weapons ban in this country. Murder rates in this country were 19.3% higher during that time period. So our point when we say having more armed people who are legally armed and legally safe in this country does reduce crime.
Well, I'm glad you brought up suicide by gun, and I'm not sure why you seem to dismiss it. You're right, about 2/3 of gun deaths are by suicide. There were 21,433 suicides by gun in 2014, but I don't see why this should be discounted. Stricter gun laws would additionally help prevent this. Now, a common thing that people would argue is that it's not the gun that causes someone to die in a suicide. And it may be true that people who want to do something like that would do that regardless of, and they would do it another way. They didn't have access to a gun. More of the people who use a gun to try to commit suicide will die. 85% of suicide attempts by firearm end in death. And for comparison, only 3% of overdose suicide attempts end in death. And because of this, having a gun in the house makes suicide far more likely, because if you choose to use a gun, there's a far higher chance that you will actually die. And nearly half of all suicides by guns, nearly half of all suicides are by gun. So with stricter gun laws, many of these would disappear.
Thank you very much. Now we will move on to questions from you, the audience. Both the college Democrats and the college Republicans will have 2 minutes to respond to your question. I would ask that you have a question, I would ask you to call upon you. And please, when you ask your question, please listen, please speak out so we can all hear the question very clearly. And in terms of order, the first question, the first team to respond to the college Democrats. Yes, sir, you had your hand up first.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot of these issues seem to be domestic issues, but from a foreign policy standpoint, it's kind of, it used to be a very bipartisan issue, and we've seen it in recent years become more of a partisan issue. So where do you personally stand on America's role moving into the future? Do we spend enough money on our military? Is our military modern enough? Can we compete in the world with the China, Russia, North Korea, Iran out there? How does America address these abroad?
I think that America needs to have less of a combative view towards the rest of the world and more of an attitude of working with the rest of the world to make the world better for everyone. Specifically, in response to your question about the military budget, I think that the military budget as it is does not need to be raised at all, and I think it could stand to be lowered a little bit. We have by far the highest military budget in the entire world. I don't know a specific number, but it's something like higher than the 19 next countries combined. And to argue that we need to be that far ahead of everyone else, I think, is kind of unreasonable. I think we need to be a leader. You mentioned a lot of other countries that are our adversaries. And I think the way to compete against that is to be a leader and be an example for the rest of the world so they would emulate us rather than fall into less democratic societies. I agree that foreign policy definitely needs to be a lot more bipartisan, we're working on it together. And it's unfortunate that in today's age, partisanship keeps people from working together.
So, you grew up in the military, and that's a great thing to talk about. Generally, we feel toward our military that we need to continue to have the greatest military in the world, and that we believe in a philosophy of peace through strength. So, keeping the other countries in the world fearful of our power. But our military does have a lot of areas where there's inefficiencies that can be worked on. We support a base realignment and closure of Iraq. Very dull subject, but essentially that would cut out a lot of the inefficient spending in our military. We can support continued involvement in NATO. We need to stand up to other countries in the world, such as Russia, which have been increasingly aggressive as the years have gone on, ever in this decade, especially under Vladimir Putin. North Korea is another issue where we need to stand up, and I think we're seeing a good deal of success on that front. So keeping up this philosophy of peace through strength and keeping the world, keeping our adversaries at bay.
Yeah, also, furthermore, I think we need to be cognizant as the issues in the Middle East have been going on. I don't know how much of you have heard on the news, but Yemen and Saudi Arabia have recently been exchanging missiles, and I think as a country, what Democrats and Republicans need to identify what our appropriate relationship is with those allies and how we get involved into the potential conflicts.
And I'll just add, Congress needs to reassert its authority as being able to declare wars and conduct our foreign policy. Too much over the years has Congress punted to the presidency and bring powers to the presidency. When our party's in power, we seem to like it. When the other party's in power, we don't. And I think same thing on that side. We need to come back to our constitutional system where Congress is the one who conducts our foreign policies, declares war, and conducts our wars, not the CIA or the presidency.
We'll now go to our second question, and the Republicans will respond first. Yes, sir.
According to the Foundation for Economic Education, or FEE, Ohio has the 43rd out of 50 worst state system when it comes to taxes, based off a system of tax rates and also, just redundancies and how basically hard it is to do those taxes. What specifically, which taxes, if any, would you cut in the state to reduce that burden?
So, one of the big things in Ohio we see is that a lot of these taxes aren't actually voted on the state legislature. In Montgomery County this has happened, in Hamilton County, Cincinnati this happened as well. A lot of these taxes are being put on the county by the county commissioners without a vote or anything like that. And that is a major issue in Ohio, one that's been coming up a lot lately especially. In terms of the Ohio tax code, we need to make sure we have a very business-friendly environment here in Ohio. Ohio, especially Dayton, is a great place for businesses. This is a natural shipping center. So we need to make sure that overall we have a reduced tax burden. Taxes can't be redundant, as you said. Personally, I would favor having a sales tax over an income tax. Not having an income tax attracts a lot more people. Look at Florida, for example, no income tax there. They do great business. So we need to simplify our tax code, obviously at a federal level, which we talked about earlier, and at a state level as well. We have to reduce that amount that people are wasting on compliance and all those things.
I think instead of talking about what we can cut, which will further increase the deficit, we should talk about things like wages. And right now in Ohio, the minimum wage, I think it's like $8.60, which only is not. Okay, well, well, let's do the federal wage. So that's $7.25, and that makes the if you're earning that as full time, so 40 hours a week, and you only make $15,000 a year. That is not enough. The consumer prices are 14% higher than they were in 2009, which was the year that the federal minimum wage was selected. So your dollar isn't going as far as it used to. I think we should consider raising the minimum wage in Ohio and the federal minimum wage as well, instead of just focusing on tax breaks.
Okay, we'll go to our third question. Yes. Jim, hand up. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So as someone who's been sexually assaulted, yeah, that's fine. As someone who's been sexually assaulted, can you speak to the fact that with the appointment of Brett Kavanaugh, regardless of whether or not you believe Dr. Ford's claims, our system allows people who have been accused of sexual assault, a very serious claim, to assume a lifetime appointment in the highest court in our nation?
I was really hurt when Kavanaugh was confirmed, because come forward like Dr. Ford did and risk your reputation, your career, and your credibility, and then to not be respected enough to be believed, I think is awful. And then to have someone on the Supreme Court who's been accused of sexual assault that will make decisions for our entire country, serving a life term, it's just unimaginable. So, the moral compass of this country right now is so skewed, and I feel so awful for sexual assault survivors, because they just saw the country say that even if you're accused of sexual assault, it's okay. You can keep on going. You can be on the Supreme Court. It's just unbelievable.
Obviously, we feel for Dr. Ford, and we feel that what we witnessed last week was it was an affront to both the dignity and honor of Dr. Ford and the dignity and honor of Brett Kavanaugh. We don't deny in any way that Dr. Ford experienced some kind of sexual assault in her past, but there's been no evidence to prove that it was Brett Kavanaugh. Obviously, we need to believe our survivors. We need to believe people who are subjected to these things, because these are heinous crimes. And not one of us up here, or not one of us in this room can even doubt that. These are heinous crimes. And this is a very important issue. I'm glad the Me Too movement has brought these things to light, because these people who have been abusing their power should not be allowed to be in these positions. But what we had with Judge Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh now, there was no evidence to prove that he did it. There was no corroborating witnesses. It happened 36 years ago that no one at the time knew about. No one had even heard about it until about a decade ago. So we feel for Dr. Ford, and this process was disrespectful to her. I feel very badly for her over this, because she put herself out there on the national stage, and you know, the partisan attacks that went against her and went, you know, against Judge Kavanaugh are, you know, heinous. And I think as a country, I hope this is a low point. I hope we from here can heal, can, you know, get back to that bipartisan spirit that we've had before. So yeah.
Next question? Yes, sir.
So this is kind of
This will go to the Republicans first.
the previous question. So Amazon recently increased its minimum wage to $15 an hour, which is something that the Democrats have been arguing we should do nationwide. Republicans have been crediting this increase in the minimum wage due to the recent tax cuts that were passed. Do you believe that this increase is due to the tax cuts, and do you believe that more companies will follow Amazon's lead in increasing the
do think Amazon raising their minimum wage to $15 has something to do with the tax cuts, but as the Democrats usually talk a lot about the $15 minimum wage movement, and it's good. It's a good movement. But what we typically believe is that the private initiative of company is what should be taking place, not the government action. And it's very good that Amazon did this, and this can be an example for the future for other corporations, so that their workforce aren't being paid below minimum wages and unlivable wages.
And so, when it comes to talking about raising the minimum wage, the ones who were affected most by that are all of us in this room. We're, for the most part, low-skilled workers who don't have much job experience, and we're the ones who need that help to get into the labor market. If you raise the minimum wage up to $15 an hour nationwide, you're going to see a lot of young people like us struggle greatly to find jobs, more so than a lot of us already are. That's not good for our nation's youth. That's not good for the people who are at the bottom of the labor spectrum, who don't have many skills, who are living in tough conditions, maybe didn't have a great education growing up. So the Democrats like to look at minimum wage as a rising tide that lifts all boats. It's more of a tsunami that takes out all the houses at the bottom of the hill. It creates a huge barrier to the entry into labor markets, and that actually keeps people trapped in a cycle of poverty and keeps them on government dependence, whereas they could be working in the market for a lower wage than 15 an hour or even 10 an hour, whatever number they're going to say.
As mentioned earlier, the current minimum wage federally is $7.25. The thing is, it's been there or around there for a long time. Do you have a year to start with?
2009.
It's been there since 2009, but we've experienced quite a bit of inflation that time, 1.68% per year. So minimum wage is not keeping up with inflation. I think it's great that Amazon has increased their minimum wage to $15 an hour. I wouldn't so much credit it to the tax breaks or anything that the current administration has done. I'd credit it to the incredible pressure put on them by, largely by the left, by the political left, pressure put on them and on all companies to raise their minimum wage. Additionally, you mentioned that it's possible to raise the minimum wage federally would increase the people losing their jobs. I'm not so sure that that's the case. But as it is right now, you can be working 1, 2, even 3 jobs and not really be making enough to survive. The fact is, if you're working, if a company considers your job is important enough to pay you to do it, you should be able to survive on that salary.
Good. Another question? Yes, sir.
Okay, so this is
This will be the Democrats first.
so I think it's much more direct. But so earlier when with regards to healthcare, there was an insinuation that a single payer system would be more like morally altruistic compared to a free market system. And then later on, regarding talking about tax breaks and everything, it was the tax breaks were called crumbs and everything like that. So why isn't the same moral standard applied in comparison of the middle and upper class tax breaks? Like even if the upper class does well, or even if the gap between the upper middle class increases, the middle class still does better. So why isn't the same moral standards applied? And on the flip side, for the Republicans, why isn't a single payer system ethical, more ethical than free market systems?
In regards to the crumbs comment, I just want to elaborate again. I was referring the comparison between what the 1% is getting, which is $33,000 a year, to what we're getting, middle class, which is $1,500 a year. That is a lot. That's a good amount of money. But in comparison, it's like below to almost nothing.
Yeah, and you mentioned that what you saw is kind of a split between our point of view there. Well, that's because it's not the same issue that we're talking about. Tax break, that affects how much money you have, and that's important. Of course, we all need to have money to survive. But what we also need to have to survive is healthcare. And if you don't have universal healthcare, and if you're poor and you get sick, if you get cancer, then you die. If you can't afford healthcare, then you don't get healthcare. And I can't think of many things that would be more important than ensuring that everyone, regardless of how much income they have, will survive getting a preventable or treatable illness.
So I just want to say that if you're poor, you'll die. Their line of attack here is just not true. At the end of the day, it's just not true. In the United States, GoFundMe has become one of the biggest private health insurers because people fund each other. That's a great thing. Charities work like that, and has been delivering very efficient results for people, has been keeping people alive. Private entity there is supposed to be that. And so I want to go back to Brian's question about morality and Medicare and healthcare for all. Healthcare is not a right, and let me explain why. You don't have a right to someone else's labor. I don't have a right to go into Griffin's house in the middle of the night if he's a doctor and force him to treat me. That doesn't work. That's not how rights work. In the United States, we have what we're called negative rights. You have a right to your own things. You don't have a right to someone else's things. And as I said earlier, the problem with socialized medicines is that you have a socialized cost, and you have socialized decision-making over that cost. So, I don't need to retell the Charlie Gard story, but that is a very common story that is, that one captured the world's attention. But it's happening all over the world. Italy had a very similar instance with that about 6 months, 8 months ago. So, yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Another, someone else? Yes, ma'am.
So the topic of morality has been brought up numerous times in this debate. So I'm just wondering how you think morality applies to the current laws regarding abortion, where you can prove the heart rate and different blood cells within just a few weeks in the first trimester of these babies that are legally being aborted right now. How can you morally justify that?
Well, I don't think we need to justify it because we're a pro-life club. We always have been, always will be. We believe in a right to life for everyone, regardless of your situation. When it comes down to policy, we can have a very in-depth discussion about Roe v. Wade and constitutional implications of that. So that is a much longer conversation. I don't think many people here are interested in constitutional law like that. But we are a pro-life organization, always have been, always will be. We support life.
In our club, we're mixed. We have, since this is a Catholic university, it's pro-life. But we have pro-life and pro-choice in our club. Federally, abortions are funded. Planned Parenthood is funded, but none of that funding goes towards abortions. So the argument that your taxes are going toward abortions is a lie, and is what people can tell you it's not true. So, yes, like I may have a different moral argument, but this isn't in politics. It doesn't need to be involved in that.
I think we have time for one last question, and we'll go way to the back there. Yes. Speak up, please. This will go to the Democrats.
When you all were discussing immigration, at one point, the Democrats who opened, you discussed your grandfather and the ban on Muslims and parents being ripped away from their children and children looking at your mother. But what you never talked about at any point was what should we do. You never offered a solution. You just pointed out all of these terrible things that are happening and saying this is bad and it's the government's fault. This is bad and you never proposed a solution that frustrated me.
Well, thanks for asking. I wanted to bring up the child's being torn away from the parents because I think that's really important right now. I think the solution is not to do that. Separating families at borders never should have happened, and they should be reunified right now. I think that's a really easy answer. And then for the travel ban, I think there shouldn't be one. So, and I think immigrants, I agree with John. I think there should be a path for illegal immigrants to become citizens. I think that could be a bipartisan issue as well.
And I don't know what we think we should do about the problem of illegal immigration. I think the easiest way to reduce illegal immigration is to make legal immigration a whole lot easier. Immigration, the centers where you come in to immigrate legally to, they're overcrowded. There's incredible waiting lists. I think the best way to do that is to have more funding to hire more staff to work them and to increase the facilities and increase the staffing at them. Of course, this would require money, and Republicans are quick to not offer money for anything that would benefit the country. But I think the best way to do that is not anything, of course. Republicans don't like taxes. But I think it's important that we have better funding to make legal immigration easier, so there's less of a need to come into the country illegally.
So, as we said in our answer earlier, you know, one of the big things we see in this country is a broken immigration system where what we need to fix is to make it easier for skilled labor to come into this country. 2018, we live in a very globalized world. Labor is flowing all over the place. We want to make sure we can attract the best and the brightest to this country. So that means reforming our system in terms of visas and how we award visas and what emphasis we put on them. And once again, we never said we wanted to deport people in this country, 11 million or up to 15 million in this country. We never said that. That is, you know, we're going to talk about that a little more. And on DACA, this wasn't brought up, but on DACA, which is still a major issue, this is an issue that is now before Congress, and we hope they find a way to make sure that 790,000 people who grew up in this country, have only known this country, are not kicked out of this country and sent to a place they don't know. We need to keep that talent here in the United States for economic and cultural purposes as well.
At this point, please give your attention to both sides as they make their closing statements. Each side will have 1 minute, and we'll start with the Republicans on the closing statement, and then we'll go to the Republicans.
So what I think we all saw tonight was, you know, playing at each other a little bit, a little back and forth, but at the end of the day, Thomas and Abigail are two of my best friends here at UD. We have a great bipartisan relationship. We do a few events every year together. And I think that's something that's really lacking in this country. We need to return to that bipartisan spirit, work with one another. Don't take politics too personally. Just because they're Democrats, I don't think they're bad people. They're good friends of mine. I think that's one of the biggest things missing in politics today. You hold the belief you're not a bad person for it. That being said, I am a Republican. I am president of College Republicans. So on November 6th, your vote for township trustee matters, for mayor matters, for county commissioner matters, for judge matters, all the way up to Congress and Senate and governor. So vote Republican. I want to know that.
I have pretty similar thoughts on that, but with a different conclusion. Vote Democrat. Also, like you said, we're good friends, even though we certainly disagree on quite a bit. And also, like you said, it's important to vote, I think, Democrat up and down the ballot, from governor to Congress, county auditor, state representative, state senate. I think really what you have at the end of the day is you've got a dichotomy. You can vote for the same policies that have been happening for the last several years under Republican rule, or you can vote for new policies that would make the United States a more inclusive, diverse, and a country that works for everyone, like I said earlier.
Thanks for coming.
Business to Allison. She has some instructions about voting, which is very important to get to vote.